Welcome to After Collapse, the Key Concepts series. My name is Max Borders, your host, and I'm also the author of the book After Collapse. Now, in our last video, we discussed the machine metaphor and some of its failings. And we left with the question, what is the best metaphor for the socioeconomy? Well, let me take a stab at answering that. Here it is, society as ecosystem. Now, society as ecosystem really is a biological metaphor. And it gets to a lot of different properties of these kinds of socioeconomic systems and their complexity. And let's focus first on the word complexity. You can see this picture of the Great Barrier Reef here, and intuitively it tells us just how complex the living systems are on our planet. And that's a very different thing, evolved, emerged, and complex. Those three properties are very different from design systems of the form of a machine, for example. So it helps us see the complexity of our socioeconomy instead of complication, which would be, as we said, like a 747. Also, the socioeconomy, we said, emerges from the right protocols. That means good rules, simple rules. In fact, the more complicated the rules, often the less complexity results. So society as an ecosystem really applies to complexity when the right rules are in place, and usually those rules are not Byzantine, but quite simple. So don't steal from people. You have a right to property, these kind of things. The socioeconomy is also unknowable by a single mind. And that really is the insight that the high minds in the last video fail to appreciate. The socioeconomy is unknowable by a single mind. You'd think that experts, especially economists, would be able to understand everything. The trouble is they can't. That, in fact, there's no way. It would fry the neural circuitry to try to understand every aspect of knowledge that is distributed among billions of people on planet Earth, particularly in the most complex economies on Earth. The socioeconomy emerges without designers or planners. And this is really what high minds fail to appreciate. You get these economic experts and they think that they're going to come up with a 5-year plan, or that they're going to be able to adjust the knobs and the rheostats in a certain way to bring about a pro-social outcome. And they're mistaken in this regard. The best we can hope for is local knowledge. Now, these twin concepts of emergence and evolution really guide our thinking with society as an ecosystem, because, of course, ecosystems are emergent phenomena and they're evolved phenomena. So, for example, you can take the idea of the firm as being more like an organism, and the wider economy is being more like the ecosystem. It's not a perfect metaphor, no metaphor is, but it gives you a lot of illumination on a highly, highly complex subject. So, in talking about complexity and in talking about the way we think about entrepreneurship, for example, entrepreneurship being a feature of the way we deal with solving problems or creating solutions for improving society and prosperity. Well, there are a couple of metaphors here too, and one of the favored metaphors that people like to use, it appeals to the machine metaphor in many ways, and this idea we talked about of mission control is the moonshot. That's the updated version of putting a man on the moon, and the idea is that there's these audacious projects that are moonshot projects. We really want to challenge that metaphor too, because it's associated with the machine metaphor and of mission control. And instead, maybe we have the mushroom shot, if you like, or the mycelial network. We'll get into it in just a minute, but let's first talk about the moonshot thinking. Peter Diamandis, who's a very famous, very learned guy who has great things to say about exponential technology, also gets on stage and gets paid a lot of money to talk about moonshot thinking. And it's really these kind of audacious projects that like Elon Musk likes to engage in. And Peter Diamandis is very much a proponent of this sort of big think, heavy resources, lots of planning, largesse to create these mega companies that are going to do fantastic things. And he encourages young entrepreneurs to use moonshot thinking. I want to push back on that a little bit. First of all, 10x thinking is fine as long as you can imagine what it looks like when it's just 2x. Okay. Second, bold initiatives are fine as far as they go, but bold, who's paying the tab on the investment, and how bold is it in terms of the likelihood of execution? This huge commitment of a largesse is another problem. I think it's funny that Elon Musk, although he's very talented, the man's obviously a genius, doesn't really have any involvement with companies, or at least he doesn't own any companies I'm aware of, that don't require government subsidy, favoritism, or taxpayer largesse. SpaceX, of course, it depends on massive grants from the United States government. And, you know, the Tesla phenomenon was only able to come about by dint of these, you know, preferred tax treatment for electric cars. So, you know, I want to give Musk credit where it's due, but moonshot thinking, I don't think, is really where we want to be in this regard. And Elon Musk, despite being a genius, is not exactly the person to model after, in my opinion. The problem with the moonshots is the successes make big old headlines, but the failures are expensive. Secondly, they often rely on this taxpayer money, as we said, and government debt, and that represents tremendous opportunity costs for smaller projects and indeed venture capital that could go into more modest projects that could scale to become wonderful and large. These opportunity costs add up to an invisible graveyard of things that never got to come into existence because money was taken out of the economy and put into these moonshot projects. And finally, this invisible graveyard of unrealized plans are attached to real people with real goals and aspirations. So while, you know, at one time Elon Musk was one of those people, surely he understands that there are others of us out there who want to participate in creating value in the economy, perhaps in a much more modest way. So my recommendation is that we exercise mycelial thinking, not just the moonshot mentality. And these are small, scalable experiments. It means we start small and we fail early and cheaply. In other words, we don't expect that our 10x thinking is going to come with a 10x investment. If we can start small, then we can get small investments into an MVP, get to market quickly, and test the concept. And I think for the most part, most venture capitalists and entrepreneurs think this way first. This is also a focus on protocol design instead of big master plans. So yes, it's an interesting thing, and we can argue about whether or not a certain amount of government largesse should go into building the Large Hadron Collider. But most of the resources in the economy should focus on people operating in their garages. So instead of focusing on big master plans that require multi-generational largesse, let's focus on small projects that can scale and scale to the level of the aspirations of the entrepreneur through creation of value at every step, through long-term value creation. And in that sense, we create value instead of trying to make history or trying to be Elon Musk. Scale should be an indicator of value, not audacity. Now, to put a finer point on this, we can look at two women who are operating in this space and who really bring about two sides of a debate. Okay, the first is Maria Mazzucato, who is an economist in England. She's an Italian American or American Italian. I think she's a citizen of both countries, but she's operating out of the UK. She's very highly regarded, but she really believes that dumping a lot of government largesse into R&D is going to bring about increased prosperity. I have my doubts about this. It's not to say that we didn't get some good things out of government investment in R&D, for example, GPS. But I think as we discussed it, you tend to point to the few successes and forget about the invisible graveyard of opportunity costs and unrealized plans from entrepreneurs who could have used that largesse for trying to scale their small businesses that could become the next Amazon, Apple, and so on. So on the other side of this debate, we have Deirdre McCloskey, who is a woman who believes in this having a go, this localized garage band, Bill Gates, John Mackey of Whole Foods, Steve Jobs in his garage, all of these micro entrepreneurs who became mega entrepreneurs over time because they were patient, persistent, and created value at every step of the way. Really, Deirdre McCloskey's work, which she calls innovism, is really about the innovators who were able to start small, test their hypothesis in the market, and then scale. And this I think is when we apply that thinking to the development of new protocols, for example, in the cryptocurrency space, we can see just how these new developments can operate in the evolutionary fitness landscape that is the global economy. And it means that we have more skin in the game with respect to the bets that we're willing to make on these smaller ventures, these more modest ventures that can become great. So as they set out the battle lines of the debate, I side overwhelmingly with Deirdre McCloskey, and I encourage you to look at her work as well. So what does this look like in terms of biology, in terms of physics? We said that there was an ecosystems metaphor, but we can go deeper, I think. And in here, I refer to the thinking of Adrian Bejan of Duke University, who is a friend of mine and been a profound influence on me, who describes what I call the law of flow, what he more prosaically calls the constructal law. But the idea is this. If you look around in nature, particularly in natural ecosystems, you'll see this everywhere, this vascularization of everything, with a few large raging rivers and many small tributaries and branches. When you look around at the natural world, you'll see it in trees. That's the most obvious. You'll see it in river basin systems. You'll see it in the circulatory systems of the body. You see it everywhere. And the more we can mimic the law of flow and respect the law of flow in our economic systems, the better off we'll be in terms of natural ecosystems' ability to generate prosperity. So just as the Great Barrier Reef and the Amazon jungle creates unequal distributions of resources in the rainforest, we see that the canopy of mahogany trees is very much steward of the jungle's capital, for example. Likewise for river basins and so on. This vascularization of everything means that not everything can be equal, that it works with a scaling law distribution or a power law distribution. And that's a very important observation in thinking about this. Now, a system to live must accommodate flow. So a system is anything we can imagine that has to deal with currents imposing on it from without. And so any kind of organization has to deal with flow, the flow of income into the organization, the flow of ideas through the organization, and so on. This law of flow operates inside the organization and throughout the entire ecosystem. We have to respect that, and we have to respect the vascularization of it, especially when we want to try to create a more egalitarian society through any kind of planning. That vascularization aspect also gives us a different kind of hierarchy than the hierarchies that are established through domination and subordination. We'll get that to the next chapter. Vascularization is really about how we best accommodate flow through any system. And finally, without these patterns, a system dies. So to live is to be animated in vascular fashion. And without this vascularization, the system dies. And it is in that death that we lose companies, we lose prosperity in general. And access to flow systems is really what we want to think about in this strange way of looking at economic ecosystems. So I appreciate you joining me today. This critical concept is simply that society ought to be more like an ecosystem. Thank you, and I hope you'll join me for the next key concept in the After Collapse series. I'll see you next time.